Hi guys, I'd like to take a look at what's this? Today I'd like to take a look at an old poem of mine called She Was a Kind of Lover. This poem is probably 30 years old. I think it's not a bad one, probably stands up even now. I don't want to talk too much about the meaning. The meaning is kind of seeing the essential female everywhere, we can say, or in different places. But what I want to concentrate on more is is the rhythm, the meter, because I was quite proud of it. I remember when I first wrote it, because it was something new, something I hadn't tried before. I wasn't very knowledgeable at the time about about different meters and rhythms in the English language, at least not talking about them technically. My ear could hear them, and that's what happened here. I think I followed a particular rhythm of my ear. I wasn't really sure what I was doing. I could uh, probably describe it now as dactyle, a series of dactylic feet, dactyls. Um, but it's just really adding a layer of description after something has already happened, kind of like grammar. Grammar does that. It talks about the rules of how we speak after we've already spoken. So that's kind of what prosody does with meter and rhythm. It talks about, gives names to all the different meters in the English language after the ear has already discerned of them, really. So perhaps, first of all, the best thing to do is to read it so we can hear it. This poem is on the Internet Archive, and on the Internet Archive, they give a possibility for a kind of electronic voice to read the poem. So it might be a good idea to let the electronic voice do that, because I've heard it once before, and it's interesting the way it's read, and we can compare it with the way I read it later. So let's bring it up. Let's see. Right, here it is. So let's hear the robotic voice on the Internet Archive reading this poem. Here it is.
She was a kind of lover, she was a kind of lover, one I had never annoyed. She reminded me of someone other, elsewhere lost in the void. Her hair was a shade of auburn, and her body was all scented, in sweet roses and daffodils. Incense burned each day for innumerable weeks. Of names she had none. She was nameless, her eyes a bottomless sea, a glimmering, sparkling, flame-blessed lover's repository. At last she went out of fashion, and that's when she flared to her best, like a dream you have sometimes imagined. A light unutterableness. Remembered victories, I still remember taking a short trip across to Cardiff to see.
Right, sorry, it was kind of continuing at the end onto the next poem. So yeah, I think that's interesting. It started pretty well, but maybe after a while, its lack of humanity meant that it didn't continue reading in the way that probably a living person would read it. Let me read it, and you can perhaps compare the two. She was a kind of lover. She was a kind of lover, one I had never annoyed. She reminded me of someone other elsewhere, lost in the void. Her hair was a shade of auburn, and her body was all scented in sweet roses and daffodils. Incense burned each day for innumerable weeks. Of names she had none, she was nameless, her eyes a bottomless sea, a glimmering, sparkling, flame-blessed lover's repository. At last she went out of fashion, and that's when she flared to her best, like a dream you have sometimes imagined, a light unutterableness. Well, I think that I kind of keep the dactylic meter going more than the electronic voice does. A dactyl then is one poetic foot, which is made up of one stressed and two unstressed syllables. She was a woman much missed how you called to me, called to me. So one foot of a stressed syllable followed by two unstressed syllables. I keep the meter going, but the electronic voice is more worried about the meaning, and in a way she's right, especially in this second verse. I read it. Her hair was a shade of auburn, and her body was all scented in sweet. You know, I want to keep the meter going. Her body was all scented in sweet roses and daffodils, incense burned each day for innumerable weeks. But the electronic voice reads it. Her hair was a shade of auburn, and her body was all scented in sweet roses and daffodils, incense burned each day for innumerable weeks. It's actually more correct, really, from a meaning point of view, but I think that in a poem of this kind, you kind of, that the meter, the rhythm is so important that you let it override everything else, really. So I would really want this poem to be read in the with the dactylic meter prominent. Um, yeah, so I was proud of the meter when I wrote the poem, although I didn't call it a dactylic meter at the time. I just knew that I'd done something interesting and a bit unusual with the meter. Um, in other words, it was an ear thing. I, uh, I did this on the basis of my ear. And it's a useful kind of meter. It sort of creates, I don't know, what does it create? It creates a sort of uncertainty, but also a strong energy and pace to the poem, drives it ahead at a great rate of knots. Um, yeah, certainly that kind of energy which just pushes it forward all the time. And another aspect of the poem I was very proud of at the time was the rhyming scheme, because it's made basically A B A B every line, and it sounds like it's full of rhymes. I think it sounds like it's really full of rhyming. But when you look at it closely, the off rhymes, half rhymes, sometimes they're hardly rhymes at all. Like she was a kind of lover, one that I had never annoyed. Okay, she reminded me of someone other. Okay, well, lover doesn't really rhyme with other. There is a er at the end, but a v doesn't rhyme with a th. And then annoyed, void. Okay, it sounds good. Annoyed, void. One I had never annoyed. She reminded me of someone other elsewhere lost in the void. Well, it sounds like a pretty full rhyme, annoyed and void. But if you see it on paper, they are completely different the way they're written, really. And I think that, uh, like a poetry master would probably say, annoyed doesn't really rhyme with void. The second verse, her hair was a shade of auburn, and her body was all scented in sweets, roses and daffodils, incense burned. I think that sounds like it rhymes, doesn't it? It sounds like it's quite a full rhyme. Her hair was a shade of auburn, and her body was all scented in sweet roses and daffodils, incense burned. But if you look closely, it's auburn and burned, and auburn and burned don't rhyme. They're not even half rhymes, really. I think that the part of the words which create the illusion of rhyming in a very full way is the orb, and the burned. So you've got the burned. You've got a very strong or sound, which somehow creates the illusion of a very full rhyme when it's not actually there. And the other rhyme in that verse, and their body was all scented in sweet roses and daffodils, incense burnt each day for innumerable weeks. Again, it sounds like a very full rhyme, but it's not. Sweet doesn't rhyme with weeks, right? Sweet doesn't even rhyme with week, but it's weeks with S here, plural. So they're not rhymes at all. You couldn't even say they were half rhymes. They're assonant rhymes. They have vowels which are the same. Sweet, a double E, and week, also a double E. So that's where the harmony comes from. Sweet and weeks, but it kind of sounds like it's a very full rhyme when it's hardly a rhyme at all. The next verse: of names she had none, she was nameless, her eyes a bottomless sea, a glimmering, sparkling, flame-blessed, lover's repository. Okay, well, her eyes a bottomless sea, rhyming with lover's repository, is an accepted kind of rhyme, I suppose. Although it's kind of off rhyme. But the other rhyme in the verse isn't a rhyme at all, is it? She of names she had none, she was nameless, her eyes a bottomless sea, a glimmering, sparkling, flame blessed. Nameless, flame blessed. You've got that less. You've got less in blessed, and you've got the less in nameless. So it makes it sound like it's a very full rhyme, when really it's hardly a rhyme at all. So, as I say, it's something I was quite proud of at the time, that I put together something that sounded like it was rhyming very fully all the time, when it was full of, it was hardly, from a conventional point of view, it was hardly rhyming at all. The last verse: at last she went out of fashion, and that's when she flared to her best. Like a dream you have sometimes imagined, a light unutterableness. Again, it sounds like they are very full rhymes, but not really. At last she went out of fashion, and that's when she flared to her best. Like a dream you have sometimes imagined. Well, fashion doesn't rhyme with imagined, but you have fashion and imagine. So you have the N sound, fashion, imagine. So that's where the illusion comes in of a full rhyme. But anyway, fashion doesn't rhyme with imagined. The other rhyme: and that's when she flared to her best. Like a dream you have sometimes imagined, a light unutterableness. So again, best doesn't rhyme with unutterableness. There is a S sound in best, and unutterableness sound in the last word of the last line. Sounds like it's a full rhyme, but actually it's not. So that's something I thought I did a good job with on this poem. It was something that had a series of rhymes which sounded very full and took the reader's attention, but when you looked closely, maybe the lines were hardly rhyming at all. And this, combined with the unusual meter, made it quite an interesting poem from my point of view at that stage, all those years ago, because combined with the content matter, it created what I thought was quite an unusual poem. So let me finish by just reading it one more time. She was a kind of lover. She was a kind of lover, one I had never annoyed. She reminded me of someone other, elsewhere, lost in the void. Her hair was a shade of auburn, and her body was all scented in sweet roses and daffodils, incense burned each day for innumerable weeks. Of names she had none, she was nameless, her eyes a bottomless sea, a glimmering, sparkling, flame-blessed lover's repository. At last she went out of fashion, and that's when she flared to her best, like a dream you have sometimes imagined, a light unutterableness.